Our next speaker is Dr. Max Moore. He is the chairman of the Extropy Institute, futurist who's trying to also make sense of how the future of the world is going to look more like the Jetsons and not like these various dystopian alternatives, and is writing on a book entitled The Proactive Principle. And with that, Dr. Moore, you have 20 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you. Since because of the limited time, I'm going to start speaking at a normal rate, and then I'll increase super exponentially until I'm going at a very high rate. Fortunately, Ray has a device he's hidden in the audience which will increase your perceptual speed at the same time. The main focus of my talk, it's hard to pick a little focus, but I decided that what I want to talk about was the fact that we may achieve superintelligence in the form of cognitive intelligence does not necessarily mean that we will achieve wisdom or super wisdom. I think everybody here is familiar with the phenomenon where somebody highly intelligent, perhaps even yourself, has made some stupid choices. Short-sighted choices, overcome by certain desires or lusts or hungers. Just really not listening to your intelligence, not letting it actually take you in the right direction. So I think that's a real problem, because why should we assume that, or we should not assume that machine intelligence will be necessarily exempt from that. It will be different, no doubt. It will have different origins, maybe different kinds of problems. But, oops, let me see, I'm going too fast for my own self now. Okay, go back a bit. So machines will probably have these problems too. So apart from the traditional question, when will machines exceed human intelligence, meaning intelligence in the standard cognitive sense, the more important question, or at least as important a question, is when will they exceed or at least match human wisdom? We can do that a little bit better than us. And I think to avoid this problem of lots of power without responsibility, as Lord Acton used to warn us about, what we need to do is explicitly pursue what we might call super wisdom, the parallel with super intelligence. But because super wisdom sounds a little bit like something from a comic book, the other term that I use is integral intelligence. So, yeah, okay, we're ready for this one now. So, integral intelligence, use that term really to mean a collection of important faculties that go beyond, stop doing that, it has a mind of its own. I should keep a safe distance. I mean, a set of qualities including mindfulness, which again, you can be highly intelligent but not very mindful. You may not really be paying attention to what your reason is telling you, what data there are out there and inside. It also means creativity, because you can be very sophisticated analytical analysis without necessarily being creative. And also, if you want to see all the options and make a wise choice, I think you have to also be able to generate lots of alternatives. Objectivity, something which we can never really completely reach, but we can approximate using principles. And of course, cognitive capability, just your ability to use your intelligence to actually solve those problems. And then what I'm calling extropic conation, I really just mean good intention, if you like, to put it very simply. And then various kinds of social, environmental, institutional support. Even if you're very smart, very wise yourself, it may be difficult to make the wise decision if everybody around you is pushing you in one direction, feeding you certain kinds of information, rewarding you for certain kinds of behavior. Certainly an issue you do within large corporations. So very, very quickly running through these, there are a whole bunch of foundations of foolishness, problems that I think potentially affect any kind of thinking being, including machine intelligence, although again, not all of them will be as much of a problem, some maybe more so. And we can group these into various groups: bounded awareness, theories about the world, other people, and ourselves. The first one, bounded awareness, this is partly the mindfulness issue and partly a set of cognitive biases that we seem to be prone to. There we go again. Oh, it's one underneath, that's what it is. It's hidden. I got it. So it really means that despite the information being out there to make a wise decision, we may not actually see it, we may not seek it, we may not want to see it. So I think actually an interesting example of that was a movie I'm sure a lot of you have seen called Memento, which I think is quite fascinating from a variety of viewpoints, where the story is sort of told backwards, or in going forwards but jumping backwards at each step, about a man who has no short-term memory and writes himself clues and tattoos his body to remind himself of what's going on. And you realize as you go through the movie that what he's done is at some point he's made a decision to fool his future self by faking information to give his life a sense of meaning. So in other words, he's overriding his intelligence, what he knows to be true, because otherwise he feels like his life is going to be futile. So he's deliberately giving himself a sense of meaning. So those are some of the major ways in which we can go wrong. Again, very quickly through these theories about the world. we tend to ignore possible outcomes or consequences because we want to simplify the world. Things are very complex, especially in difficult kinds of issues like we're discussing. So we tend to oversimplify so that we can handle it, so we don't feel too dumb. Leads to certain biases, ignoring low probability events, which Nick Bostrom mentioned. We're actually very poor at, also with the faulty judgment of risk it relates to, we're very poor at looking at issues, at events that are very improbable, very unlikely, happen very rarely, but which may have very large consequences. We tend to ignore those. Limiting the search for stakeholders, again, you could be very intelligent in the sense of reaching a goal given a certain very narrow definition of what the problem is and who should benefit from it. But that may not be satisfactory to other people. There are other things we don't need to run through, but the standard stuff in decision analysis. I think a major one that could be relevant here, and we'll hope that is machine intelligences are designed to avoid this problem, which is not learning from experience, or hindsight bias. We are very, very good at using the hindsight bias to prove how smart we are, that our predictions come out correctly, that we made the right decision, that we were right, because we remember things conveniently as to what we actually said in the past. And I've certainly noticed this. It's very, very common, and what makes it a particularly big problem in organizations is that nobody wants to keep objective records of what they decided, other than things you have to do, like board meetings perhaps, and even those may be written up afterwards, again with selective memory. I think one way, probably a number of people in this audience and on the stage who like to make predictions, I think it's very good to, as Ray's had to do, is to write them down publicly, and then you can actually follow up on them later. Because I know a lot of people who say, oh, I predicted that 20 years ago. But if you ask them, well, where can I see this prediction? Check on it, you rarely can find that. And that applies to everyday kinds of decisions too. Again, I won't go through this one, but another set of problems we have are theories of other people. We tend to suffer from these kinds of limitations in our perception. And then theories about ourselves, the theories we hold about ourselves bias our perceptions of things. No matter how good our cognitive processing ability, it can lead us off in the wrong direction. I won't run through these in detail, but the illusion of favorability, believing you're better than other people in certain respects. There are numerous studies, which many of you will know about, showing, for instance, that everybody thinks, well, probably 90% of people or more think they're better than average drivers. On just about any skill you take, certain very specialized ones, like brain surgery perhaps, people will think that they're better than average. The illusion of control being a very common one, that we tend to overestimate how much control we have over the future. Not just the world's future, but even that of around us. And going along with that really is that we tend to over-explain things in terms of particular people causing certain things to happen, rather than being perhaps unintended outcomes or side effects or unforeseen consequences or simply random chance. For instance, if we find a cluster of cases of cancer in a certain area, most people will immediately say, oh, that must be because of the nuclear power station or the power lines or whatever it is that's nearby. But in fact, just statistically, there are going to be certain clusters which have nothing to do with cancer rates. And also a big one, I think, is this last one here, a lack of access to emotional centers of the brain. Because our reason and emotion are intertwined in a certain way, primarily in one direction, in that when we have an emotional response, when we perceive something, what we see as, say, threatening, it goes up certain pathways and connects to the cognitive centers of the brain, the cortex, and sets off certain kinds of thoughts. For instance, I see a lion, I see a tiger, or I see a mugger, and sets off fight or flight reactions, and you very quickly take an action. However, we're very poor at going back the other way. We just don't really have the neural pathways yet to go back and go down into our emotions and modify them, say, well, this feeling of anxiety I'm having is irrational, or I shouldn't be terrified of flying in this plane. It's a perfectly decent plane, the chances are very low of having an accident. But we can't just switch off emotions like that. It takes, we have huge numbers of emotional problems in the population, and it takes a lot of therapy or drugs to even try and work on them. We can't just sort of rationally, there are rational emotive therapies and so on, but they don't automatically work instantly. And I think that's one thing, at the end I'll just mention that maybe we have some hope of doing something about that. So consequences of unwise superintelligent choices, being who's superintelligent but maybe not so wise, just achieving certain goals is going to be more costly, unforeseen, undesirable side effects, various kinds of externalities, which again is a consequence of this kind of narrow maximization, which you can very easily see a lot of AI systems, not LEs I'm sure, because you'll be a lot more considerate than that, but a lot of AI systems which are built for a specific purpose, not just as an intellectual challenge to see if you can really create general intelligence, but specific AIs that are designed to do a certain thing, they may do it very, very well. They may be very good at narrow maximizing, but they may not have very inclusive goals. They may just focus very narrowly on that goal and get the job done. Well, it might be great, if you want an assassin, let's say, to do their job at all costs. But for most decisions, obviously that would not be very satisfactory. Okay. Now this is a big issue. I'm just sort of going to pass right through this one, but there's a big question of what kind of paths might an AI take if not guided in the ways which I'm going to suggest. And I'm not going to try and give any kind of definitive answer to that because it's going to be very speculative. Just make a couple of points. One promising fact, one promising feature of these intelligences is that they are not the outcome, at least directly, of evolution, of biological evolution and natural selection. Now, sort of indirectly, they are because they're shaped by people and organizations who themselves were shaped by evolution. And so to the extent that's true, they won't escape all these problems. But humans have a lot of specific problems because of our genetic imperatives. It tends to, again, make us too focused on certain goals, sex, food, shelter, and so on, and not perhaps think more long-term or more inclusively about our goals. And I think that could lead to some of the problems, again, I'll mention at the end in one of the possible scenarios, where we use superintelligence to pursue certain narrow goals of ours, which may not be necessarily wise in the context of our larger sense of what's important to us. But at least that's one promising thing. They don't directly have this programming. We have the opportunity, at least, to create a new foundation, a perhaps more healthy foundation, a wiser foundation, but it's not automatic. So a range of solutions. Integral intelligence, which is, I've kind of gestured at, and we'll talk about a little part of that. Again, the idea of trying to, when you design an AI, or when you're, say, commenting on a project that's out there already, to encourage the consideration of all these other aspects of thinking and deciding, not just the cognitive element, as crucial as that is. Friendly AI, which is Eliza's focus, to build an AI structure, its infrastructure, its basic foundation in such a way that it really can't help but turn out to be friendly. Kind of a deeper version of Asimov's laws of robotics, I suppose. Well, there's very basic laws that are supposed to prevent certain kinds of harm. I think friendly AI would be a lot more intelligent than that, go a lot deeper. But essentially it would make it pretty much just not in its nature to be harmful, and that would be very nice. So it's a big design challenge. And my kind of current focus is the proactionary principle, as I call it, as a sort of response to the precautionary principle. The proactionary principle, I think, could actually be part of friendly AI programming, in the sense that it's a set of principles for thinking wisely, both for individuals and for organizations, that tries to really not compel, but strongly encourage people to use these deeper, broader ways of thinking about problems, especially organizations dealing with major technological questions, regulatory organizations, government bodies, international treaties, rules organizations, those kinds of things. So I'm going to very briefly talk a bit about that. And yeah, one of them will be principle openness. But first of all, the principle itself. The proactionary principle grew out of an online summit we held a couple of years ago. Some of you may have heard of the precautionary principle, although it's more well known explicitly in Europe, but it does actually have an effect here also, which essentially says you cannot introduce any new technology, even a production process that affects the environment or human well-being, unless you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it will not produce any harm, or in one version, any long-lasting pervasive harm. Now, of course, that's extremely hard to prove. You can't really prove a negative like that very well. So the proactionary principle responds to that and to all the kind of concerns we're discussing here about possible major problems all the way up to the level of these extinction events, catastrophic problems. It responds to that by drawing on the most well-tested leading procedures to structure the decision-making process. In other words, there's a lot of research done on decision-making, and there are known methods for producing better outcomes. And some people are very good at some of those and don't know much about the others. They tend to be in different fields. So what I'm trying to do with the proactionary principle is to bring all of this knowledge together, get people to contribute to it from their various disciplines. It's built into the principles, but those themselves have more specific applications, which I've just created a field guide to help actually implement the principles. But the idea is to embody what I call the wisdom of structure, of taking all our knowledge, the best available knowledge, the best, not the most popular, but the most scientifically well-tested knowledge about how to decide, how to think, how to come up with options and reach the optimal decision, and build that into a set of principles and a procedure which you could apply in lots of different circumstances and hopefully reach a wiser decision. So you can think of the proactionary principle as a prop for wise thinking. It's a combination essentially of critical thinking, creative thinking, and evidence-based forecasting, all drawing on the best available methods. So I'm not going to run through all this, but the 10 principles there are in brief. Again, I want to stress objectivity as a principle to tackle these biases. You have to be very aware of these biases, both in individuals and in organizations, and how they might crop up in designed minds, and then try to counteract those very explicitly. And I think we're very far from having a full set of tools for knowing how to prevent these problems, but there are some ways to do that to various degrees. So this principle, of course, is not fixed in that sense. It keeps drawing on the latest knowledge that's well validated to provide better procedures. And one, because I think it relates to what Corey was saying, the principle of openness and transparency is crucial, and it's going to be hard to get everybody to agree on that with the AI project, because it may be seen as a competitive advantage to keep it quiet. A lot of governments will not want to say what they're working on, especially for military applications. But I think all people like us who are concerned about these issues should really pressure people to make their projects as open as possible. And even if they can't be fully open, to open up as much as possible so that we can actually see, are they following these principles? Are they following these guidelines? Are they recognizing these various kinds of possible problems and threats and doing something about it? Only by having that kind of public discussion, a well-informed discussion, can we reduce the chances of it going off in some unwise direction. So essentially, you can see 4 possible futures. If you get superintelligence, if we don't get superintelligence and we don't get integral intelligence or super wisdom, we have pretty much business as usual. Things will go on as they are, we'll make slow progress, but it's going to be really, really ugly as we go along. I think I'm a strong believer in progress, and that we have made a lot of progress, but the world is pretty ugly at the current state and has lots of room for improvement. So if we get superintelligence, or if we get let's go first of all, integral intelligence or super wisdom without superintelligence, what would that be like? That would be kind of interesting. That seems possible. People who really are a lot more responsible, it's probably especially on the organizational level, it's probably easier to make sure that happens, although certainly not easy. They make much wiser decisions. I think progress will be faster because you wouldn't have to undo so many things, costs will be lower, there'll be few bad side effects you get sued for later on and so on. So I think it would be faster, it's certainly a lot smoother in making technological progress. Whereas if you had superintelligence without integral intelligence, it's going to be fast but messy. You probably achieve a lot of specific goals very rapidly and efficiently from a certain point of view, but probably with a lot of these collateral effects that I've talked about. So ideally, what we might get is if we can make good progress on superintelligence, as some of the other speakers are saying we are doing, and we can integrate that with integral intelligence so that it takes account of all these other factors in deciding, then we could end up with a pretty good world that's not going to be perfect, because I don't really believe that there aren't conflicts of goals among perfectly wise people, but it should go a lot more smoothly, we should resolve issues a lot more quickly, a lot less damage. And I can't say what the exact outcome would be in terms of what would that world be like, because to say that with any kind of great confidence would mean that I already sort of am the wisest person in the world, because I can say this is the world we should have. So what I think I can recommend is that we follow these principles, which are embodied in the proactionary principle, which you can get online. That's a process for reaching good decisions. It clearly does not specify what they are beforehand. So I cannot specify what this world is like. All I can say is that we get there a lot faster, and it should be a lot better than otherwise. And in my view, it would include things like, despite some skepticism here, it would include a life that doesn't have to end. It would include, I don't like the word immortality particularly, but agelessness, if you like, where aging ceases to exist and you choose how long you live apart from certain maybe huge catastrophes. It would also include re-engineering the body and brain in ways that improve on evolution. Evolution and nature have done a pretty great job in a way, but there are a lot of problems, a lot of things we need to fix. We need debugging pretty seriously. And I think the world, to me it's fairly obvious we would have to go that direction for the world to be really a smart and wise world. But again, I can't predict that. All I can say is, let's make wiser decisions as well as more intelligent decisions, and I think we'll all be happy with the outcome of the Singularity. Thank you.